and welcome. You're watching Editor's Take on Moneycontrol. I'm Sakshi Batra and with me is Gaurav Choudhury. He's the Deputy Executive Editor of Moneycontrol, and we are going to be discussing about the Q3 GDP data that has been released by the government just a while back. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for joining in. A 4.7% Q3 GDP figure is what we have. Most of the economists were going with this number, but considering that this comes at the backdrop of the revision that we've already seen in Q1 and Q2 GDP figures, how do you see this number?
Yeah, it kind of confirms the slowdown that the economy finds itself in currently, and that is showing up in the headline numbers. There are two things here. One, quarterly GDP growth estimates are now more frequently revised than it was the case earlier.
Yeah.
So as of today, we have again seen a revision of the previous quarter's GDP growth estimates from 4.5 to 5.1%.
Yeah.
Sequentially, that would imply that real GDP growth has actually fallen, has slowed down from 5.1% the previous quarter to 4.7%, and it's 4.7%, and again compared to the same quarter previous year, it was about 5.6%. That is something that the government would clearly like to look at more seriously. But what the data does tell us is that there is a slowdown, and this slowdown is coming out in all the numbers. So, say for instance, we take, how do you spot the economy is in a slowdown or is in the midst of a economy-wide squeeze? It's found in all kinds of data. Say for instance, if people are traveling less, if people are that will come out from number of people who have booked air tickets to fly, or if railways are moving less cargo, that would mean that production activity has actually slowed down.
Correct.
Otherwise, railways would be moving more cargo. So
all
those data is coming out now. If you look at, say for instance, passengers handled at airports in Q3 1920, the data for which has come out today, has grown 4.6% compared to 10.7% in the same quarter last year. Now look at railways, which moves both cargo and passengers. Net ton kilometers, which is a proxy indicator for finding out or measuring the extent to which cargo is moving from one point to another point within the country. Net ton kilometers have actually fallen. That is minus 4.7% this quarter compared to 5.7% the same quarter last year. Passenger kilometers, that is people moving in trains, have continues to remain in negative territory, minus 1.0% in this quarter compared to minus 2. It's a slight increase, slight improvement, but nevertheless it remains in negative territory. Not a big indicator of slowdown, which is a gauge to measure industrial slowdown, is bank credit. If corporates aren't taking money, if banks are awash with funds but corporates aren't taking, that will show up in overall bank credit, and that is also showing up in these numbers. Say for instance, aggregate bank credits have actually grown 7% in the quarter under review, that is quarter 3 of 1920, compared to 13.9% in the same quarter previous year. Likewise, production of coal has fallen minus 4.3%. It is contracted 4.3% compared to 5.1% the same quarter last year. Production of crude oil has fallen minus 6.2% compared to minus 4.3% the same quarter last year. Likewise, for natural gas, consumption of steel, which is a key intermediate product for construction activity. If consumption of steel falls, it's a clear sign that construction activity has actually slowed down, and in fact would have fallen. Consumption of steel, that is demand for steel, or people buying steel. And who buys steel? It is essentially the real estate companies or people who are building roads and highways. That has fallen 17.3% compared to 6.7% in quarter 3 of last year, which in the first 9 months it is even worse. So that sale of commercial vehicles, I beg your pardon, has fallen minus 17.3% compared to 6.7% last year. What does it mean? That the movement of goods, why aren't people buying commercial vehicles? People aren't buying commercial vehicles because there's less demand for goods to move from one point A to point B within the country. And that on a consolidated basis for the first 9 months, in fact, sale of commercial vehicles have actually fallen 21.1% compared to 25.9% growth last year. All these proxy indicators actually show that the broader economy is in the midst of a serious crippling industrial slowdown.
Absolutely, and we are seeing this. If you look at the revised estimates or the revised numbers of Q1 FY20 GDP, which is now at 5.6%, the Q2 FY20 GDP now stands at 5.1%, and the Q3 figures that have been released today come in at 4.7%. Gaurav, is there any indication indication of a bottoming out of the economy? Are you seeing that happen, at least from the kind of sales that we are seeing in the auto numbers or the monthly sales that we are getting, or any other indications?
So there are a few green shoots that some experts have been pointing out. And I would assume, I mean, things could have probably, the headline numbers probably could have been a little bit more worse if there was no revision in the previous quarter's estimates.
Correct.
So we know in the 31st of January, the government came out with revised estimates of the previous quarters. If those were not revised, it would have meant that this quarter's GDP growth probably would have shown, it would come out with an even more worse print.
Okay.
That is something that the government would be looking at. But yes, the key here is that construction activity has to take place. And if there's a slowdown in demand, the slowdown in demand has to be reversed by people at the toward the lower strata of the income scale spending more. That can come only when construction activity takes place. So to two sectors, the revival of two sectors is absolutely critical for the economy to revive. The broader economy, one is real estate, which has a very high propensity to absorb people, particularly the skilled and semi-skilled category. And construction activity in infrastructure projects like roads and highways, because this is not a sector which absorbs, creates job with a certain degree of immediacy, and that is where the propensity of these people to spend is also even more. So that's going to boost demand. It's not about trying to boost demand in cars and vehicles as much as it is trying to boost demand in what are called essentials.
Also, FY20 GDP estimate now stands at 5%, which means in Q4 more of the heavy lifting will have to be done so as to achieve the 5% number. But do you think the economic recovery could be hampered with the kind of uncertainty that we are grappling with of the coronavirus outbreak in China?
So that is something that was an unknown that has played out, and that is applicable to across the world, and the government will have to deal with it. We have seen which are the sectors that are likely to get the worst impacted because of coronavirus. These are companies, these are sectors that that use raw material or ingredients that are imported from China.
Correct.
And if somebody is producing a product, if someone is producing a product that uses a lot of raw material that are imported from China, and that supply chain gets disrupted, the production activity also will get disrupted in the local economy here, in the local factories here, and that will clearly play out across multiple layers, including hiring activity and also people's income levels. That is something that's an endogenous factor. It's an exogenous factor. That is the government, the production conditions that lie outside, and people here do not have control over it.
Correct.
So there has to be some kind of a demand boost from within the economy that the government will have to bring through appropriate policy interventions, for which I would believe that the government will have to do a lot of heavy lifting. Public sector will have to do a lot of heavy lifting, particularly in construction, so that income levels among the skilled and the semi-skilled and unskilled go up, so that this is the class of people who has a higher propensity to spend and consume, and that kind of gives a boost to demand.
Right. And lastly, Gaurav, this data actually comes at the backdrop of when the union budget has been presented. Do you think the government spending in all these sectors, or the kind of stimulus measures that they have taken, or the announcements that have been given, will aid growth in any fashion? Or do you think still the heavy lifting will have to be done by the RBI, going forward?
So I think we have kind of reached the limit to which monetary conditions can actually boost growth. And the RBI has also indicated to that extent. It is up to now to the fiscal policy, which is managed by the government, to ensure that to ensure demand takes place. There is a boost in demand that will have to have the surest way to revive an economy is to give more money in the hands of people. That you can do by raising income levels. But income levels will rise only when there is more economic activity that takes place. In conditions that exist now, particularly in the world economy, which is shaky because of coronavirus and other exogenous factors, the demand boost will have to come from appropriate policy intervention. Given the fact that the government actually did not come out with an explicit stimulus, one would be left wondering what the government could actually do now, given that official statistics have confirmed that we are in the midst of a serious slowdown.
All right. Thanks a lot then, Gaurav, for sharing all these details. The current figure of 4.7% of Q3 GDP does confirm that we are in the midst of an economic slowdown. Policy interventions will have to be taken on the government's end to actually push growth from here on. Thanks a lot for joining us in this edition of Editor's Take, and do stay logged on to moneycontrol.com for more news and updates. Thanks for watching.